A young man raised a shotgun on a California street and pulled the trigger on random passers-by with whom he had no connection whatsoever. There had been no argument, no hatred. They were complete strangers to one another. After killing them, the young man did not panic or flee. He simply stood where he was, calm and composed, as if he had just completed a task that absolutely had to be done. However, as police dug deeper into the case, a chilling truth gradually emerged. In the young man's own perception, he was not merely committing murder. He believed he was carrying out a sacrificial act to save the world. He was convinced that he had heard the voice of God, who warned him that a devastating earthquake was about to strike California. According to this divine message, the only way to prevent the catastrophe was to continually offer human lives. In his mind, every person he killed delayed the earthquake. Every drop of blood spilled was buying time and life for countless strangers. In his world, strangers, friends, family members, and even priests were nothing more than chosen sacrifices. He never believed he was committing a crime. He thought he was simply obeying God's commands and fulfilling the responsibility of a savior. To him, these deaths were nothing more than a necessary price to pay in order to save even more people. Only at this point did investigators realize that this was not an ordinary serial murder case, but a rampage completely consumed by messianic delusions and religious hallucinations. So what exactly were the voices this man claimed to hear? And how did he, step by step, transform himself into one of the most terrifying serial killers in California's history? To answer these questions, we must return to California in the 1970s, step into the world of Herbert William Mullen, and uncover the blood-soaked truth behind a massacre committed in the name of salvation. Herbert William Mullen was born on April 18, 1947, in Salinas, California, into a middle-class family. Coincidentally, his birth date marked the 42nd anniversary of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, an accidental overlap in time that his later distorted mind would endow with a sense of destiny and ominous significance. Mullen's father was a World War II veteran with a rigid, authoritarian personality, marked by the harsh discipline and need for control typical of military life. After leaving the service, he worked a routine clerical job, but often turned to alcohol, venting his dissatisfaction and suppressed frustrations on his family. Mullen's mother, by contrast, was gentle but timid, permanently stuck in a passive role within the marriage. Faced with her husband's coldness and constant criticism, she could only endure in silence. Their marriage had long since become hollow, existing in name only. The household was perpetually steeped in a cold, oppressive atmosphere. Silent dinners and emotional distance in the living room became the most vivid memories of Mullen's childhood. Growing up in such an environment, Mullen's childhood appeared outwardly calm, yet it concealed the seeds of deep psychological imbalance. His parents' emotional detachment deprived him of a sense of security from an early age, while his father's harsh discipline taught him to suppress his true emotions and mask inner confusion with outward obedience. As he entered adolescence, Mullen displayed remarkable social skills. He was outgoing, cheerful, and athletic, with a passion for outdoor activities such as surfing and baseball. Surfing in particular allowed him to temporarily escape the suffocating pressure of his home life, offering fleeting moments of freedom and belonging amid the rise and fall of the waves. In 1969, Mullen enrolled in a local community college, finally escaping the direct restraints of his family. What should have been the beginning of a new chapter in his life instead marked the rapid deterioration of his mental state. During his time in college, he gradually began to display symptoms such as disorganized thinking and emotional instability. In conversations, his remarks often failed to connect, with topics shifting abruptly and unpredictably, making it difficult for others to follow his train of thought. Emotionally, Mullen also became increasingly volatile, one moment smiling broadly, the next erupting into anger over the smallest provocation. The event that completely shattered Mullen's psychological stability occurred in 1970, when his closest friend, Dean Richardson, was killed in a sudden car accident. The news struck Mullen like a bolt from the blue, utterly destroying what little remained of his fragile mental defenses. Dean was one of the very few people with whom Mullen could let his guard down and speak openly. The two surfed together, skipped classes together, and shared their innermost thoughts. In Mullen's otherwise bleak adolescence, Dean was one of the rare sources of light. The loss of his closest friend plunged Mullen into a grief from which he could not escape. He refused to accept the reality of Dean's death, stubbornly insisting that Dean had merely departed temporarily and would eventually return in another form. In order to preserve this bond, Mullen built a crude shrine in his room, carefully arranging Dean's photograph alongside his surfboard, baseball cap, and other personal belongings. He performed daily rituals before the shrine, firmly believing that this would allow him to communicate with Dean's spirit and bring about reincarnation. From that point on, Mullen became completely detached from reality. He immersed himself in esoteric and occult literature, obsessively studying theories of reincarnation and spirit communication. The once outgoing and cheerful young man grew silent, withdrawn, and emotionally distant, and his circle of friends gradually drifted away. By the end of 1970, Mullen's parents finally recognized the severity of the situation and forcibly brought him to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation. He was ultimately diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, a mental illness characterized primarily by delusions and auditory hallucinations, in which sufferers become trapped in distorted thinking and lose the ability to distinguish reality from illusion. Following the diagnosis, Mullen began medication, and his condition was brought under partial control in a relatively short period of time. His thinking became clearer, and his emotions stabilized to some extent. However, Mullen consistently resisted drug treatment, believing that medication would interfere with his ability to communicate with Dean's spirit and would also weaken his capacity to perceive his so-called special mission. Once his symptoms showed even slight improvement, he repeatedly stopped taking his medication on his own, causing his condition to relapse again and again. As a result, over the course of just over a year, Mullen was admitted to 5 different psychiatric hospitals. Each hospitalization could only suppress his symptoms temporarily, failing to address the underlying problem. During this same period, Mullen began experimenting with hallucinogenic drugs such as LSD and marijuana. These substances acted like a catalyst, dramatically intensifying his mental disorganization, sharpening what had once been vague auditory and visual hallucinations, and deepening both his fascination with death and his obsession with ritual. Between 1971 and 1972, Mullen's mental state descended into complete chaos. The auditory hallucinations and delusions, brought on by paranoid schizophrenia, gradually drove him into madness. At this stage, the voices in Mullen's head were no longer limited to the whispers of his friend Dean. Instead, they evolved into clearer, more commanding guidance. These voices claimed to originate from the will of the universe and repeatedly delivered a single core message. A catastrophic earthquake was about to strike California, one that would claim countless lives. The only way to prevent this disaster, according to the voices, was through human sacrifice, offering living lives to appease the universe's wrath and preserve the balance of the earth. This absurd delusion gradually solidified in Mullen's mind into an unshakable truth. He became obsessively focused on earthquake-related news, interpreting every minor tremor in California, even vibrations caused by construction, as warning signs of the impending catastrophe. At the same time, he wove the broader historical context of the Vietnam War's approaching end into his delusional framework, constructing what he believed to be a more complete logic. In his view, the deaths of countless American soldiers on the battlefield had created a kind of natural blood sacrifice, and it was precisely this sacrificial force that had been suppressing California's seismic energy, delaying the disaster for years. Now, with the war nearing its end and fewer lives being lost in combat, the power of the sacrifice was weakening, and the risk of a massive earthquake was growing accordingly. And he, Herbert Mullen, because his birthday coincided with the anniversary of the San Francisco earthquake, had been chosen by the will of the universe as the sole hope of saving California. He believed he bore a sacred mission, to extend the sacrifice through deliberate killing and thereby prevent the earthquake. At this point, although Mullen had not yet carried out any acts of murder, The concept of human sacrifice had already taken deep root in his mind. In conversations, he would obliquely refer to the necessity of sacrifice and the mission to save the world. To others, however, such remarks were dismissed either as the ramblings of a mentally ill man or as the delusions of someone obsessed with mysticism. No one truly took his abnormalities seriously. As Mullen's condition worsened, the commands from the voices grew more frequent and more intense, as if constantly urging him to act without delay. He began consciously observing the people around him, contemplating how to select offerings and how to carry out the sacrifices. On October 13, 1972, Mullen finally put his delusions into action and committed his first murder. That afternoon, Mullen drove a dilapidated sedan along the mountain roads near Santa Cruz, searching for a suitable target. He deliberately parked the car in a remote stretch of road, pretended the engine had broken down, and propped open the hood, feigning anxious repairs while waiting for his prey to take the bait. As evening approached, a 55-year-old drifter named Lawrence White passed by, and seeing Mullen's predicament, approached out of simple goodwill to ask whether he needed help. White believed he was merely assisting a young man in trouble, never imagining that this small act of kindness would lead him straight into the abyss of death. When Mullen saw White step forward to offer help, he felt no gratitude at all, only a calm sense that the objective had been achieved. He pretended to accept White's assistance, and as White bent over to examine the engine, Mullen seized the moment. He quickly retrieved a baseball bat he had prepared in advance from inside the car, and using all his strength, swung it down onto White's head. The dull impact echoed harshly through the silent mountain road. White did not even have time to cry out before collapsing heavily to the ground, blood instantly spreading across the earth. Mullen did not stop there. He struck White's head several more times, only stopping once he was certain that White had completely lost all signs of life. This was the first time Mullen had taken a human life with his own hands. At first, a trace of panic flickered through him, and his hands shook uncontrollably. But soon the voices in his head offered praise, telling him the sacrifice had been successful and that the risk of an earthquake had been reduced yet again. This affirmation quickly calmed Mullen. He then dragged White's body deep into the roadside woods, crudely concealing it with fallen leaves and branches. Afterward, he gathered the baseball bat, got back into his car, and drove away from the scene. The entire crime was carried out efficiently and cleanly, leaving no obvious fingerprints, hair, or other forensic evidence behind. The method was random and concealed, creating significant obstacles for the police investigation that followed. 3 days later, White's body was discovered by a technician conducting fieldwork in the mountains, who immediately contacted the police. The autopsy revealed that the victim had died from multiple blunt force blows to the head, with the time of death estimated at approximately 3 days earlier. However, because the victim was homeless, had no fixed residence, no relatives to file a missing person report, and an extremely limited social circle, police were unable to identify suspects through personal connections. Moreover, the crime scene was located in a remote wooded area, and aside from vague impact marks consistent with a baseball bat, no valuable clues were recovered. Investigators initially concluded that the case might have involved gang retaliation or a conflict between transients. With no clear direction for further inquiry, the case was soon shelved and became a cold case. This isolated killing not only allowed Mullen to escape punishment, but also reinforced his belief that the homeless man had willingly become a sacrifice, an offering chosen by the will of the universe, unrelated to any personal malice on Mullen's part. Seeing his mission tacitly approved by the universe, Mullen's fear completely dissolved, replaced by a warped sense of accomplishment. It was this moment that opened Pandora's box, paving the way for his subsequent string of murders. Having successfully evaded justice after his first killing, Mullen grew increasingly bold, while the voices in his head urged him with ever greater frequency to carry out more sacrifices. On a weekend night in early November 1972, Mullen drove to a remote campsite on the outskirts of Santa Cruz. Deep within the campground, he spotted a young couple, 20-year-old Robert Jensen and 19-year-old Susan Bartlett, sitting close together by a campfire, chatting and completely unaware of the danger approaching. Mullen selected this couple not only because of the secluded setting, but also due to a warped, symbolic logic within his delusional system. In his mind, couples represented reproduction and the continuation of life. Using the lives of a young couple as a sacrifice, he believed, would more effectively amplify the power of the offering and better protect against the threat of an earthquake. Mullen quietly circled behind them and pulled out a pre-prepared .22 caliber handgun. Without any warning, he pulled the trigger and fired into Robert's back. The gunshot shattered the stillness of the campsite, and Robert collapsed and died on the spot. Terrified by the sudden gunfire, Susan jumped up and tried to flee, but Mullen quickly chased her down and shot her in the leg. She fell to the ground and begged Mullen to spare her life, but Mullen's eyes were vacant and devoid of mercy. He fired another shot into her head, ending her life. Early the next morning, campground staff discovered the two bodies and immediately called the police. Upon arriving at the scene, investigators recovered shell casings and several indistinct footprints. Autopsies confirmed that both victims had died from gunshot wounds, and the murder weapon was identified as a .22 caliber handgun. However, due to the constant flow of people through the campsite, no witnesses had seen Mullen, and with only limited physical evidence recovered, police were unable to determine the suspect's identity or motive. Moreover, this case appeared to have no obvious connection to the earlier murder of the homeless man, White. The method had changed from blunt force trauma to gunfire. The victims had shifted from a homeless individual to a young couple, and the locations were entirely different. As a result, police were unable to link the two cases and instead investigated them separately, with no significant breakthroughs. Just 1 week later, Mullen struck again, this time choosing an even more random target. One afternoon in mid-November 1972, Mullen drove through downtown Santa Cruz and noticed a middle-aged man walking alone along the roadside, with few pedestrians nearby. The 45-year-old man was John Doyle, a cashier at a local supermarket who had just finished his shift and was heading home. Without hesitation, Mullen slowly pulled alongside Doyle. In the brief moment when they were parallel, Mullen rolled down the window, drew his handgun, and fired 2 shots into Doyle's chest. Doyle collapsed instantly as nearby pedestrians scattered in panic, while Mullen calmly drove away from the scene. The attack unfolded with extreme speed, involving almost no extraneous movement. Mullen did not exchange a single word with the victim, nor was there any argument. The killing was entirely random and without reason. By this point, Mullen's psychological state had undergone a fundamental shift. In his eyes, the victims were no longer living, breathing human beings, but mere tools to fulfill his sacrificial mission, interchangeable offerings to be taken at will. Killing had become increasingly mechanical and emotionally detached for him. After receiving the report, police immediately processed the scene and recovered shell casings of the same caliber as those found in the earlier couple's murder. Several witnesses also provided a rough description of the suspect's vehicle, an old black sedan. However, because the witnesses were highly distressed, none could provide more detailed license plate information or a clear description of the suspect's appearance. This time, investigators began to notice a pattern in the crimes. All involved .22 caliber gunfire, random victim selection, and swift escape after delivering fatal shots. Although the victims and locations still differed, police started to suspect that the shootings were the work of the same individual. Their preliminary assessment was that the suspect exhibited extreme antisocial traits, had an unknown motive, and posed a significant danger to the public. The recovered shell casings, witness descriptions of the vehicle, and the killer's pattern of random attacks followed by rapid escape provided crucial clues for developing a psychological profile. Investigators gradually came to realize that Santa Cruz might be harboring a serial shooter, and the focus of the investigation began to narrow. As 1973 began, Mullen's delusional system escalated further. Ordinary killing no longer felt sufficient to generate the power he believed was required for sacrifice. As a result, he began selecting targets with special identities in order to strengthen the ritualistic nature of the offering. Within his distorted belief system, sacrificing someone he knew carried far greater meaning than killing a stranger. Being willing to betray a friend for the sake of saving California, he believed, demonstrated a deeper loyalty to his mission. This greater sacrifice, in his mind, would produce a stronger effect and enhance the power of the offering. Mullen therefore set his sights on an acquaintance, 30-year-old Jim Janella. Jim was a former high school classmate with whom Mullen had once been on good terms. They had skipped classes together, played baseball together, and Jim had even introduced Mullen to marijuana. On January 5, 1973, Mullen contacted Jim under the pretense of catching up after not seeing each other for a long time. After learning that Jim was at home, Mullen drove to his apartment. Jim was completely unsuspecting and warmly welcomed Mullen inside. The two exchanged a few casual words before Mullen's expression suddenly changed. He pulled out a handgun he had concealed on his person and aimed it at Jim. Startled by the sudden turn of events, Jim demanded to know what Mullen was doing and tried to reason with him. But Mullen paid no attention to Jim's protests. His mind was consumed solely by the command to sacrifice. Without hesitation, he pulled the trigger, firing a single shot into Jim's head and killing him instantly. After killing Jim, Mullen did not flee immediately. He calmly cleaned up the scene and only then drove away, apparently satisfied. This murder marked a turning point in the investigation, because all previous victims had been random strangers. In this case, however, the victim clearly knew the killer. There were no signs of a struggle, and the scene resembled nothing more than old friends meeting to catch up. This realization led investigators to conclude that the killer's actions were not entirely random and may have involved a degree of subjective intent, possibly even a hidden internal logic. Police began examining Jim's social connections, which brought Mullen into their field of inquiry. However, because Mullen appeared extremely calm and had no obvious conflict with Jim, he was not considered a prime suspect. After a brief interview, he was dismissed. Nevertheless, this murder involving a known acquaintance caused police to abandon their earlier assumptions of random robbery homicide or gang retaliation. Investigators began to suspect that the killings were deliberate and purposeful, narrowing the focus of the investigation even further. Just over 2 weeks later, Mullen struck again. This time, his chosen target carried powerful religious symbolism: Father Henry Tomey. On January 20th, 1973, Mullen drove to St. Mary's Catholic Church in Los Gatos. By this point, his delusional system had fully closed in on itself. He believed that the blood of a religious figure was the purest offering, and that using a priest as a sacrifice would allow him to communicate more directly with the will of the universe, maximizing the ritual's effectiveness and more reliably preventing the earthquake. That morning, 48-year-old Father Tomey was waiting in the confessional to hear parishioners' confessions. Mullen entered the church pretending that he wished to confess and stepped into the confessional. Inside, Mullen exchanged a few words with Father Tomey before claiming that he had heard the voice of God, which told him that the priest was willing to become a sacrificial offering in order to save California. At that point, Father Tomey realized that Mullen was mentally unstable and attempted to calm him down, even trying to contact other church staff. Mullen, however, had lost patience. He pulled out his handgun and fired 2 shots into the priest's chest. Father Tomey collapsed and died inside the confessional. After the shooting, Mullen did not linger and quickly fled the church. Because there were few people present at the time, no one witnessed the killing. However, in his haste, Mullen accidentally left a fingerprint on the confessional door handle. Father Tomey's murder sent shockwaves through the local community. Highly respected and deeply loved by his parishioners, his death plunged the area into fear and outrage. Upon receiving the report, police conducted a meticulous search of the church, recovered the fingerprint from the door handle, and confirmed that the murder weapon was once again a .22 caliber handgun. Taking into account the previous cases and the newly discovered fingerprint, investigators launched a large-scale search. Yet due to the technological limitations of the time, police were still unable to make progress, and the investigation once again reached a dead end. By March 1973, Mullen's mental state had completely spiraled out of control. The voices in his head relentlessly urged him on, insisting that the catastrophic earthquake was imminent and that he had to accelerate the sacrifices, killing more people, more quickly, if there was any hope of stopping the disaster in time. Driven by this overwhelming sense of urgency, Mullen entered a frenzied killing spree. Multiple random murders occurred in rapid succession, and his methods were no longer limited to gunfire. Blunt force attacks and stabbings also appeared, with no cooling-off period whatsoever. At times, Mullen even committed 2 murders in a single day. The violence had become utterly unrestrained, devoid of limits or hesitation. The surge in killings plunged Santa Cruz into an unprecedented state of panic. Residents lived in constant fear, afraid to go out alone during the day and refusing to leave their homes at night. Police were under immense pressure. In an effort to solve the case as quickly as possible, California law enforcement formed a multi-jurisdictional task force, consolidating all related homicides in Santa Cruz and surrounding areas. Investigators re-examined the timelines, victim profiles, and methods of attack in an attempt to uncover patterns. Then on February 13, 1973, Mullen's killing spree finally came to an end. That morning, 72-year-old retired boxer Fred Perez was tending to weeds in his backyard when Mullen drove past and noticed that Perez was alone. Once again, the voices in Mullen's head erupted, urging him to carry out another sacrifice immediately. Without hesitation, Mullen made a U-turn, parked the car, raised his .22 caliber handgun, and fired 3 shots into Perez's chest. Perez collapsed on the spot. The entire scene was witnessed clearly by Perez's niece and a neighboring resident. The neighbor reacted quickly, memorizing the license plate number of Mullen's black sedan and immediately calling the police. Using the plate information, officers rapidly traced the vehicle back to its owner, Herbert Mullen. Mullen had previously entered the police's field of inquiry due to his acquaintance with Jim Janella, and his documented mental instability closely matched the psychological profile investigators had developed. The task force immediately ordered his arrest. Less than 2 kilometers from the crime scene, at a nearby intersection, police stopped Mullen's black sedan and apprehended him without incident. A search of Mullen's vehicle uncovered the .22 caliber handgun used in the attacks, along with a wrench and a dagger. Ballistic testing confirmed that the handgun was the murder weapon in multiple cases, and blood residue found on the firearm matched the DNA of several victims. At the same time, Mullen's fingerprints were compared with those recovered from the scene of Father Tommy's murder and were found to be a perfect match. In addition, multiple witnesses positively identified Mullen after viewing his photograph, confirming him as the suspect in the several earlier killings. At this point, all evidence converged into a complete and unbroken chain, leaving Mullen's crimes fully exposed and impossible to deny. On July 30th, 1973, Mullen's trial officially began. The Santa Cruz County District Attorney charged him with 10 counts of first-degree murder. The central focus of the trial was not whether Mullen had committed the murders, but whether he possessed criminal responsibility in the legal sense at the time of the killings. Under the American legal system's Monachan rule, a defendant can be found legally insane and thus exempt from criminal liability if, due to mental illness, they were unable to distinguish right from wrong at the time of the crime. Mullen's defense attorneys argued that he suffered from severe paranoid schizophrenia and therefore should be found not guilty by reason of insanity. Several psychiatrists testified on his behalf. They stated that during the murders, Mullen had long been tormented by hallucinations and delusions, fully immersed in his self-constructed world of sacrificial salvation. He was unable to distinguish reality from illusion and genuinely believed his killings were a divine mission rather than criminal acts. According to the doctors, he lacked the capacity to discern right from wrong and should not be held criminally responsible. To support this claim, the defense submitted Mullen's repeated psychiatric hospitalization records, medication logs, and detailed psychological evaluation reports. The prosecution, however, presented the opposing viewpoint. They argued that Mullen had engaged in deliberate actions to conceal his crimes, for example, dragging White's body into the woods and cleaning up traces at Jim's apartment. These behaviors demonstrated that he understood the illegality of his actions and had the ability to distinguish right from wrong, making him legally responsible. The prosecutors also highlighted Mullen's calm and methodical conduct during the murders, from selecting targets and carrying out the killings to fleeing the scene, arguing that the orderly nature of his actions further indicated he possessed criminal responsibility. During the trial, Mullen's behavior was extremely erratic. At times, he was silent and vacant, staring blankly, while at other moments he became suddenly agitated, shouting at the judge and jury that he was California's hero, claiming that his killings had indeed prevented the earthquake, and demanding to be released. He even attempted to represent himself, refusing his lawyer's assistance, and at times broke down, tearfully claiming guilt. His extreme mood swings and bizarre conduct further confirmed his mental instability. After 14 hours of jury deliberation, the verdict was delivered. Mullen was found to have exhibited clear premeditation in 6 of the murders, including those of Jim Janella and Father Tomei, and was convicted of first-degree murder for those cases. In the remaining 5 murders, he was found to have acted impulsively and was convicted of second-degree murder. On December 11, 1973, the court issued its final sentence. Mullen was given multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole.